The People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. Tonight's discussion will focus on the importance of embedding environmental protection in the development landscape. I'm so pleased to invite to the studio Dr. Jagath, Gunawardana, attorney at law and environmental activist. Good evening and welcome, Dr. Jagath.
Good evening.
When we talk about policy formulation, designing new projects, we often tend to forget or deprioritize the importance of environmental conservation and protection. Speak to us about how dangerous this is.
Yes, the issue of environmental protection or environmental conservation has come to the center stage due to the gross negligence of the environment during the past, and it has caused so many adverse repercussions. Now we can always see when there is a period of heavy rain, we have flash floods, big floods, followed by landslides and other hazards. When there is a bout of dry weather, we get droughts and associated problems. This itself is an indication of how short-sighted we had been in adopting our policies, or rather not adopting correct policies in formulating development activities. And also when designing projects, we don't look at the environment but only look at the short-term benefits that this kind of activity can give. But when it takes some time for the environment to hit back at the destruction, and then we realize what has been done. But unfortunately, most of the time we are not in a position to rectify the wrongs that had been done. But we think that we can use technology and mitigate it, but it is also not a foolproof way, because technology falls short of addressing the deeper issues. And what I want to emphasize is that the environment itself is a very complex system, and when you try to tinker with the complex system, we never know what the repercussions are until the repercussions hit us. So when we are dealing with a complex system, we have to respect the system and work in accordance with the system and not destroy it or tinker it in such a manner that we never know what will happen at the end of it. So environment is a complex system, although we tend to look at it as water, soil, air, or animals or plants. All these are components, but they are linked in numerous ways, and that is where the complexity lies. So like the economies of the present day, environment is also a complex system, and far more complex than all these man-made systems put together. And that is one thing that we have to keep in mind. When we destroy one part of the environment, the repercussions come from another angle.
Dr. Gunawardana, but if we take a look at our ancient scriptures or the historical documents or the writings of Justice C.G. Veeramantri, for example, we see passages where nature, components of nature are referred to with such reverence and godliness. So from then to now, where have we gone wrong?
I think it's a problem of attitudes. The Oriental attitude that we are part of wanted to respect nature and live in harmony with the nature. So that is the word. We lived in harmony with the environment. We lived in harmony with other creatures. Of course, there was hunting, but it was also done in a rather methodical, sustainable manner. For instance, we never have a history of making a species of animal or plant extinct. But all this happened after the advent of the Europeans into these parts of the world, where they brought a different ideology. They thought that they can conquer nature, that they can impose their will upon nature, which is a fallacy. And we are all suffering because of that attitude. And unfortunately, we are now in the 21st century, but we still, some of our people who take decisions have that same attitude, that they can conquer nature. They look at nature as an adversary who needs to be tamed, conquered, destroyed and built upon with other things, which will not bring any sustainable result at the end of the day, but only destruction of the humankind. Although our people may not have looked at things like ecology, but they had an inherent knowledge of the ecological principles. So they respected nature. These not only Sri Lankans, but also in India, China and the Orient, they had a way of living in harmony with nature, or if I put it very simply, live and let live. We lived and let other creatures also live with us. So that attitude changed. Still many people think that if there is a pest animal or a weed, we have to destroy it. To a certain extent it is correct, but at the end of the day, this destructive attitude that we can destroy all the other creatures and live all alone in this planet is an absolute fallacy, and that is what drives environmental destruction also.
We tend to have a very reactive approach to environmental destruction as opposed to having a proactive one. For example, in the recent past, we can point to several examples where after mega development projects have been completed without proper environmental assessment or environmental safeguards being followed, as a result of which entire villages have faced the repercussions, visible repercussions. People go to court, or people start protesting, or they don't protest enough, they don't advocate enough. So how do we deal with this issue of being reactive? Because by then the damage is already done, and it's irremediable damage we're talking about.
Yes, I totally agree with you, because environment being a complex system, we can't rectify what has been damaged. That is not very easy, because we never know what is the real damage that is caused to the environment, because we always now speak about life support systems. We now talk of environmental services, but 30 years ago we never heard these words, and the people who thought wisely and try to warn the people that these things will bring adverse repercussions to the country or to the world were looked upon or looked down as people who are having attitudes that does not fit the developed mindset of theirs. But what happened is, this short-sightedness led to a lot of destructive activities, and it is still doing so. And as you very correctly said, we don't have a means of rectifying it. First of all, we don't know what has been damaged really. We can see that this ecosystem is damaged, but how to bring that ecosystem back is a question that no one can answer, because it's not a collection of trees, it's not a collection of plants, it is the complex interactions between different living entities and living and living entities that makes the system. So once you tinker with the system and disrupt the system has a way of hitting back, and we are facing that backlash for the past 30-35 years in different forms. But unfortunately, most of the policy makers, most of the decision makers have not learned the lesson and still continue to destroy and degrade the environment that is left to us. Now we are not having enough forest cover in this country, and we had been telling this, and so many other parties had been telling this for the past 3 decades or more. Rather than replanting and trying to at least rectify it to a certain extent, we are still trying to give remaining natural ecosystems for destructive activities under the guise of development. Similar with the farming systems that were in this country for centuries, we look at them in a different manner. They are living systems where people had a certain sense of harmony, but now with new agricultural technologies, I don't condemn the technologies, but some people are so blinded by the technological advances that they don't see the wider repercussions of it. Just take one example, some of these highly hazardous agrochemicals are really biocides. They kill all the living animals that get in contact with them. So that destroys the whole web of life in that area, and that will have other repercussions by way of another pest or unwanted species of animal going into overpopulations. So these things had to be looked, and my advice always is that the environment is a living system, a complex system, and we have to be very careful when we try to change it. And we have to do it with a sense of respect and a sense of care and caution. Those are the three words that I use. Respect, care and caution should be exercised when we try to destroy part of the environment for development or other activities.
Dr. Gunawardana, there is a knowledge gap in the sense that we don't know the intricate, interconnected nature of the environment, of biodiversity, ecosystems, all of these things we are unaware of. So without knowing, people don't know any better.
That is again a problem of our thinking. When we are small, we are asked to wash our hands before we partake of a meal. The principle is the precautionary approach, and it is the same approach that we have to put into effect when we do these kinds of activities. The precautionary approach says what we don't know might hurt us. So be careful, take care. We may not have any germs on our hands, but the precautionary principle says if you have germs in your hands, that will adversely affect your health. So wash your hands. So that is the precautionary approach. When you develop a certain area, you have to take the same precautionary approach. What we don't know might hurt you. And that is exactly the first principle that was taught in the ancient texts such as Hitopadesha and Panchatantra. They start with that story of the monkey who pulled the jack between two halves of a half-sawn plank, and that is, of course, the precautionary principle that is embedded in that story. So precautionary principle was a guiding principle in ancient times, and it is still so. We maintain armies, we maintain a lot of security personnel on the basis of the precautionary principle. The enemy may come and hurt us, and we have to be prepared to meet such an eventuality. So that's also part of the precautionary approach. But unfortunately, when it comes to development activities, that precautionary principle is thrown to the winds, and when the problem occurs, they always try to tinker and try to mitigate it, and then sometimes it is too late. Most of these issues, which has become big issues, should have been mitigated and rectified a long time ago. When we know that our short-sightedness is creating a problem, that is the time when we have to stop and take stock of the situation.
We are in conversation with attorney at law, Dr. Jagath Gunawardana. We're going for a short commercial break. We'll be right back.
The People's Platform.
ජනාධිපතිතුමාගේ විදිහට අපි ගොඩද
මේ ප්‍රතිපත්ති රාමුවත් මේකත් හිස් වූ රාමුවක්
නායකෙක්ට පුළුවන් අවශ්‍යයි නම් සංවේදීත් වෙලා ඒ වෙලාවෙම තාර්කිකත් වෙන්න
ජානමය හේතුත් බලපාන්න පුළුවන් ද සමහර වෙලාවට මානසික තත්ත්ව වෙනස් වෙන්න
මානසික රෝගයක් 80%ක් ජානගතයි 20%ක් එන්වයරන්මන්ට් එකේ ඉන්නේ
නින්දේදිත් සිදුවෙන ශ්වසන අපහසුතාවන් පිළිබඳ අපිට වාර්තා වෙනවා මේක ගොරවනකොට වැඩි වෙනවද
නින්දේදී සිදුවන ශ්වසන අවහිරතාවය නැත්නම් අපි මේක හඳුන්වනවා මේ ඔබ්ස්ට්‍රක්ටිව් ස්ලීප් ඇප්නියා කියන තත්ත්වය
ජාතික මෙහෙවර සතියේ දිනවල උදෑසන 11ට
ඔයා කොහොමද මෙහෙම තත්වයකට පත් වුණා මම ඒකට හේතුව teach you a lesson I won't spare all of you මම ඔයාට සමාව දීලා ඉවරයි
කිසිම බැඳීමක් නැත්නම් ඔයාගේ ඇස්වලින් මං වෙලෙම ඔය තරම් කඳුරු වැටෙන්නේ හැමදේම නැති වුණොත් තිබ්ලි ඔයාට පුළුවන් මට තව එක් අවස්ථාවක් දෙන්න
අද රාත්‍රී 9:30ට සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන් TV1 TV for life
Woman's social media post sparks privileged debate in Parliament with Rohitha calling for action. Politicians fear public scrutiny, argues Dr. Harini Amarasuriya. Presidential election on track, confirms Minister Nimal Siripala. Field Marshal vows to stay in SJB as long as political principles remain unchanged. Will former President Bandaranayake be given a post in the new alliance? Sarath Weerasekara opposes handing over country's gateways to Indian companies.
TV1. TV for life. The People's Platform.
Welcome back. I'm in conversation with attorney at law Dr. Jagath Gunawardana. We're discussing the importance of embedding environmental conservation and protection in the development landscape. Dr. Gunawardana, we are victims of climate change as a smaller country. The government of Sri Lanka has taken certain proactive measures in this respect. What are your thoughts on it? Are we doing enough? Must we do more? If so, what must we do?
I agree with you that Sri Lanka is not a perpetrator of climate change but an unfortunate victim, because we are not a net emitter of greenhouse gases and these gases, but we are a net absorber because our greenery absorbs a lot of the gases that are emitted by other countries as well as by us. So we are in a different position from the developed countries. But the unfortunate thing is we have to create conditions that will mitigate or minimize the adverse implications caused by climate change. We can't prevent it, we can't stop it, but we can make ourselves, as I put it, resilient to climate change. And that resilience is something that we have to build into the systems, in agriculture, in irrigation, in home gardens, in our buildings. Everything has to be thought of in terms of climate change mitigation and how to face the adverse implications of climate change. But unfortunately, there are some measures that are taken by all the governments in the past and including in the present, which will not help us to be resilient but will make us more vulnerable to the implications of climate change. One is that the destruction of the remaining areas of natural habitats, which will lead to a lot of issues. Then we have to think of flash floods, we have to think of droughts. So we have to keep the quality of the soil, keep a certain area of land under forest cover or tree cover, and also think of the intrusion of salinity into this country. Sea level rise is one issue, and the deepening of water bodies by way of removing excess sand from the water bodies is another big issue that is not addressed. Now we talk of crocodiles attacking humans and human beings being endangered by the crocodiles in the rivers and canals. Who brought in crocodiles? Sand mining. When sand is removed from these water bodies, salinity intrudes into this area when there is a drought or when there is a high tide. Mostly during the drought periods like this period that we are now having, salinity goes up the rivers because the water flow from the rivers down to the sea is reduced. And salinity brings with it another plethora of problems. Crocodiles is only the visible end of it, but salinity is a big issue that we are not tackling. Similarly, denuding land of forest cover and plant cover will cause desertification. We have seen signs of desertification in the middle of this country, but no one is sensitive to it. When we speak about these issues, people find fault with us, but we know what is going to happen and we try to forewarn the authorities of the repercussions that we have to prevent for the sake of our present and future generations.
So biodiversity loss is one of the key issues faced by Sri Lanka.
Yes, it is another key issue that many people don't take care of. Sri Lanka is rich in biodiversity. We tell it very proudly, but when you look at the red data list that was published in 2021, you can see how many species of animals and plants are in danger of extinction. So when the red list gets longer, it shows that we are in trouble. When the number of critically endangered species is getting longer, we know that we are in trouble. And there is another red listing process which Sri Lanka has yet to adopt, that is called ecosystem red listing. It looks at the probability of the ecosystem collapsing. So if it's critically endangered, that means that there is a very high probability of the ecosystem collapsing in the near future. So these are the new ecological tools that had been developed in other countries, which we can adopt to give a fair prediction of the state of affairs that we are currently in. We have to adopt these things. We are too late in not adapting these things. We are lagging behind in these things. So when it comes to biological diversity, there is ecosystem diversity that we have to protect. The different ecosystems, the different species of animals and plants, and the diversity within the species, which is also a very much overlooked thing. When it comes to the genetic diversity of within a species, we have to look at all the cultivated plant varieties, including rice, and also the native animal breeds that had been in this country for a long time. Many people are not aware that the smallest breed of cattle is in Sri Lanka. It's called the Batuharaka. It's the smallest breed that I came to know more than 2 decades ago. But we don't pay enough attention to our native breeds. We look down upon them, thinking that the hybrid varieties or newly developed varieties are much better than them. Of course, they may give a higher yield, but our diversity holds the genetic keys for the future development of this country, for climate change resilience, for the future production of new crop varieties which may be resilient to climate change, which may be resilient to pest attacks, which may be resilient to salinity. So we have to look very carefully about the remaining biological diversity of this country and prevent it going any further towards extinction, and take all the things that we need to take to protect them. In my case, I take both cultivated crops, the biodiversity of the cultivated varieties of crops, farm animals, together with the wild biodiversity, because these things are interrelated and all these things are important for our future survival.
When we talk about intervention, do you think that statutory intervention alone would suffice, coupled with perhaps education at every level? What more needs to be done in terms of interventions?
I think we have to think afresh of the whole system. Rather than having piecemeal reforms in certain systems, we have to sit down and think of Sri Lanka as one big ecosystem and think in accordance with the surrounding systems like the oceans, the climate change factors, and how to face them in the short term, and then how to face them in the long term, how to build resilience, how to protect what we have already remaining, how to prevent the destruction that is currently happening, how to prevent the loss of biological diversity, the loss of non-renewable resources in this country. It's another big issue that needs to be addressed. Then the issue of pollution that is pervading the whole system and affecting human beings also. So pollution is one other aspect that we need to think. When we produce more, we have a lot of refuse material and waste material. So refuse and waste taken together is another issue that has to be tackled. Waste is the things that may adversely affect you. Refuse material is the things that ultimately result in the things that we produce. We have to look at all these issues together in a holistic manner and not looking at one issue as a isolated issue and try to rectify it, because all these issues need to be addressed. And addressing this kind of a plethora of different issues needs a lot of courage, and it also calls for a lot of foresight, and it calls for a lot of thinking about what is going to happen and what we need to do. And all this needs a lot of dialogue.
Dr. Gunawardana, speaking of a lot of dialogue, we've had a lot of dialogue with respect to enacting the Animal Welfare Bill, for example.
Yes.
The Minister of Justice himself was on this program a few months ago, and he said, yes, we need to enact it soon, but it's still not done. Why?
It's a loss of priorities, I think. There are two enactments that I want to mention in addition to this one.
Sure.
One is the Biosafety Act.
Okay.
It is still in the bill stage for more than 10 years. It's about the genetically modified organisms. The second is, from the environment side, protection of the marine environment. We have the Marine Pollution Prevention Act, but it needs a lot of new additions to it.
Okay.
And we had been proposing new additions for the past 10 years. From 2014, we had been giving proposals from time to time. And when the two disasters, the Express Pearl and the New Diamond, struck us, we realized how unprepared we are, both physically, in planning, and also legally. So what we had been talking and telling these authorities for the past decade is revamp this legislation. So we have to think of the ocean in a fresh manner. Ocean is also important to us than the land-based ecosystems.
What do we do when the policymakers don't really care?
That is the problem. All of us have a voice. We have to let our voice heard. We may be having a lot of problems, day-to-day problems, cost of living and all these other associated problems, but we have to at least devote a little bit of time for the sake of our future generations. So when and how we can act depends on each individual. I know what I can do, I know what I should be doing, and when I take a look at these two things, what I should be doing and what I can do, I always try to strike a balance between the two and do the maximum that I can. I request everyone not to do all that you can, but at least select some area of interest, some area of concern, and try to make a change. That will have a big effect. It's having a ripple effect. And like in a complex system, the small measures will create big waves at the end of it.
I think that's a beautiful note on which we can wrap up this conversation. Thank you very much, Dr. Jagath Gunawardana. Always a pleasure speaking with you.
Nice.
Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again tomorrow. Good night.